On Sacramento Boulevard, in the suburb of Oak Park, a man plays catch with his son. Although the condemned house next door has undergone some renovations, the man recently boarded it up to prevent its use as a neighborhood trick pad. But when his son throws the ball too far, it disappears inside the house.
The dad goes to check out the house, and he sees that the back door is jarred open after he had nailed it shut. He also smells something funny.
The man calls the police, and Detective Sergeant John Cabrera arrives at the scene.
It was mid-afternoon, hot July day. Before I got to the door, I could already smell what I had smelled many times before, that stench of death. Went down into the basement area and looked around, and then found the victim had been dragged on the floor from the east end of the basement all the way to the west end. And then some items were placed on top of her in order to try to conceal her body.
The female victim lies in a fetal position, her wrists and ankles bound with an electrical cord.
After looking at the scene, looking at the items that I found there, which included some type of metal pads that commonly used in the smoking of rock cocaine, and given the state of how we found the victim, that was kind of obvious to me that there was probably some drug use going on, that there was some kind of a sexual activity going on. We knew that the house was under renovation, but we also knew that it was in an area of high drug use. That's what some of the people told us that we had canvassed in the neighborhood, and that was, people were using it, people were coming and going. So we really couldn't clearly establish if anyone had seen her or the perpetrator or anything to lead them to believe that something had occurred.
It took them a while, at least a couple of weeks, to identify the body, but they were able to identify that it was Angela Polidori.
We had found that she was reported missing that month, and her background showed that she'd had a history of prostitution, drug use.
As far as the media is concerned, it is just another tragic end to an already tragic life.
Another back page story, as far as anybody could tell.
With no witnesses and no confirmed cause of death, police are once again left with little to go on. Remembering a similar case from the month before, police search for connections between the two deaths.
Given the circumstances on Angela's case, where this is a house that was currently being renovated, nobody was living there, the type of activity as far as narcotic activity, maybe some sexual activity going on, that was what we could connect to Yolanda Johnson's case. But at that point, that is really all we really had.
With the results of the DNA test still pending and no hard evidence to connect anyone to the crimes, police can only continue the search for the killer's identity before he kills again.
As a department, we wanted to make sure that we had as much as we could to prove our case. So, yeah, it was very much on our minds.
Unfortunately for the police and for some of the working girls of Oak Park, time is already running out. March 1987. It has been 8 months since the decomposed, partially nude bodies of 2 prostitutes were discovered in Oak Park, a low-income suburb of Sacramento, California. Homicide investigators have suspicions that the 2 murders are connected. They know that both women were heavily into crack cocaine, and that both were found in deserted houses where prostitutes took clients to have sex. They also know that Angela Polidori was last seen driving off with an unidentified man the night she disappeared. With little else to go on, police still search for leads that tie Yolanda Johnson and Angela Polidori to a single killer. As head of the department's missing persons branch, Detective John Cabrera has been sifting through files opened over the past year, looking for a link to other prostitutes who have disappeared.
It's not real easy to determine if you have a prostitute that's a missing person, if in fact they're the victim of a crime, you know that disappearance could be based on the fact that they were arrested in another county or jurisdiction or even another state. So it takes a while to try to track them down.
Several cases, however, share definite similarities. Cabrera knows one of them firsthand. She is 24-year-old Linda Vitella, a drug addict and known prostitute.
John Cabrera would tell me he would, when he was working Vice, he would run up on Linda Vitella working 16th Street, working a stroll. Hey, what are you doing here? Get out of here. I know what you're doing. And she would leave and disappear.
Missing for more than a year, she was last seen in February 1986.
Linda was supposed to go over to her mom's house to get her hair done. Linda didn't show. She did not show. Someone who was acquainted with Linda said they saw her and another individual. Linda jumps in the car with this male companion that she was with, and they took off. They never saw Linda again.
The most recent disappearance on Cabrera's list occurred just 1 month earlier, in February 1987. The mother of 2 children, 26-year-old Cherie Washington, was a woman whose life was spiraling out of control.
She was absolutely a beautiful, gorgeous woman. She was a singer. She was a dancer. They said when she go to the parties, she would be the best dancer and singer out the whole set. As beautiful as she was, somehow she fell into drugs. And when she got into drugs, she did do a little prostitution.
February 6th, 1987. At 9 p.m., after a night spent doing drugs at her sister's house, Cherie heads to a local liquor store.
An hour went by. 2 hours went by. And she's not back. So the sister and the best friend, they go out looking for Cherie. She just kind of like, poof, just disappeared in the thin smoke.
She had been reported missing. She was one of a group of, I believe, 8 that we were taking a look at the time. All similar, all a history of narcotics use, all a history of one time or another some prostitution. So we were connecting with that possibility that somehow they were connected to our perpetrator.
March 19th, 1987. At a repossessed home in Oak Park, workmen are preparing to lay drainage pipe when they come across a piece of plywood buried in the backyard.
So they dug up around it, and then they noticed that it was a black trash bag sticking out as well. So one of the guys said, well, I have this knife, I'll just cut it open and we'll see what it is. And he cut the bag open and a foot pops out. A human foot pops out.
Homicide detectives find the decomposed body of a woman tied in the fetal position by electrical cords. Word of another body in Oak Park reaches the local media.
I don't think anybody gave a second thought to the first one, or 2, or even 3. But then when it became kind of a pattern, that was the deal right there, that you figure, well, maybe there's, a little bit more to this that's going on.
As with a previous body, the level of decomposition makes the body difficult to identify.
The layers of tissue become so decomposed that you can't take fingerprints. The tissue on the fingertips, the skin sloughs off.
2 tattoos on the victim's shoulders are the only definitive clues, but police cannot match them with their list of missing persons. However, media reports about the body prompt one family to contact police and ultimately give the unidentified victim a name. 18-year-old high school dropout turned prostitute, Maria Apodaca.
I believe Maria was biracial, black and Latina. Young, very attractive. Another person who was arrested, busted for drugs, crack cocaine in particular. There were people who wanted to help her, clean up her act, get her into rehab and stuff like that. She wanted to beat the drug, but she never could. She never could.
Although Maria has been missing for almost 6 months, her family and friends never report her disappearance.
I think there is some reluctance, and I think that reluctance is born out of the knowledge that that particular person maybe was involved in prostitution or high narcotics use, and that simply the police weren't going to do anything.
With the identification of Maria Apodaca, investigators turn their attention to the address where her body was found. One witness, who lived in the house until November 1986, tells detectives that Maria was a frequent visitor. In fact, a number of women involved in prostitution came to the residence between April and November 86, not only to have sex, but to get high on rock cocaine. Each time, they were in the company of the same person, Morris Solomon Jr. Further investigation brings another important link to the surface. All 3 locations where bodies have been found are homes once lived in or renovated by Morris Solomon. It is the break that Sacramento police have been searching for. Not only are the 3 crime scenes very similar, but their new information now ties Morris Solomon to all 3 victims and each of the crime scenes.
We could see that there was a commonality on how they were victimized and how they were found, how they were left. It became evident that maybe one person was responsible for these deaths, of these victims.
Police are more certain than ever that one person is Morris Solomon Jr. And although it may already be too late, they have to stop him before he can kill again. March 1987. With the discovery of 3 murdered prostitutes in the Sacramento suburb of Oak Park, homicide detectives are sure that they have a serial killer on their hands. They suspect that killer is Morris Solomon Jr. He also has a criminal record involving the assault and rape of women working in the sex trade, but has had no convictions since 1980. In fact, with a reputation for being a skilled and hard-working craftsman employers can count on, Solomon appears to be staying out of trouble. Although he still uses the services of Oak Park prostitutes, they all agree that as a customer, he is friendly and generous. Since they still lack the hard evidence needed to make an arrest, Sacramento police send a special surveillance team to keep an eye on the Oak Park handyman.
It was generally to keep a tab on what his daily activity was, or if in fact he was going to do anything that might immediately connect him to some of these other deaths, or something a little bit more viable at the time.
In the meantime, detectives continue to search for evidence that links Solomon not only to the 3 murders, but to unsolved missing persons cases involving prostitutes and known drug users.
What we know as a commonality linking the victims, I think one of them would be narcotics use, prostitution, being out in the street, and predominantly they all were hanging in Oak Park. And so we could see this clear pattern. So what we did was we used the missing persons cases, and we were able to publish the people that we were looking for, as that there was a possibility that maybe they were connected to some of these cases, or maybe their disappearance was connected in some way to these cases that we were having.
What detectives don't want to do is tip their hand by giving too much information to the media.
Nobody was really sure that at the time, they knew there were a lot of women being murdered, but I don't think at the time anybody figured, or anybody knew exactly, except for the police, what was going on.
There were connections made, but once again, the police, the Sacramento Police Department didn't want to, they didn't want to blow their investigation.
While news of another murder barely creates a stir in and around Oak Park, families of the 3 victims and those of the women still missing are eager to see the case solved.
We went and talked with families, trying to get information as to other people who might be able to help us, who they were maybe hanging around. And then we started to go even deeper into friends or friends of friends to try to get more information as to the possibility of having witnesses that might have seen the victim with, the perpetrator. In some of the cases, we were very successful.
Police are now able to connect Morris Solomon to more